Shani, do we need it tonight?
Boker Tova, Shavua Tova, Shana Tova, and we hope Tachel Shana Uberchoteha. And now we're going to get started. As Moses said, I'm going to try to jam pack everything, and I apologize. This is not the way that I wanted to start this morning, and ask Mechila even in advance. And I'd like to begin, and I don't know if Daniela or Shani spoke. Shani spoke. And Josh, beautiful. So I'll have to listen to the recording. That's right. Again, but to mention as well what a tremendous what this is, to be able to teach Torah in memory of both Daniela, Josh's father, and Shoshana's father, Shmuel ben Rachael Rudolph, who I had the split to get to know as well, and in memory of their grandparents, Rachael ben Yoshua Palak Rudolph, alav hashalom, Golda bat Shlomo Rudolph, aleha hashalom, Moshe Yosef ben Elimelech Mordechai Feder, alav hashalom, Dvor bat Ephraim Yaakov Feder, aleha hashalom, and in memory of their uncle, Rav Shlomo ben Rachael Rudolph, alav hashalom. So let's get started with, I would say, the third in our series, but even if you haven't been here for Sefer Shoftim, and even if you haven't heard of the first parak of Sefer Shmuel serving as a tikkun for both the stories of Yiftach and Shimshon, we're going to revisit a different aspect that we find certainly in the beginning of Sefer Shmuel with the reading of Rachael, but this time appreciate it within the context of Aseret Yimei Teshuva, understand certainly as we prepare for Yom HaKippurim. So we get started with what we know and a source that we've seen numerous times in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, namely some of the seminal events that occurred on Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, as we know, as spoken here in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, telling us that the most important events that happen in this world happen on a more global level. And one has to look at even the events that seem to be particular to Am Yisrael to truly understand them on a much more universal plane. So for example, B'Tishrei, as Rabbi Eliezer says, Nivra ha'olam. B'Tishrei, in the month of Tishrei, all the Avot were born except for Yitzchak, but they all died in Tishrei. Basically, what Rabbi Eliezer mandates, as opposed to his, one can say his peer, Rabbi Yoshua, is that all these events that happen in this world, beginning with the creation of the world, have a direct effect on Am Yisrael. So for example, B'Rosh Hashanah nifgada Sarah, Rachael, v'Chana. When you look at the stories of Sarah, Rachael, and Chana, these three very famous barren women who give birth to leaders of Am Yisrael, recognize that this also happens on Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Elazar, the Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer's Talmud, Rabbi Akiva, basically asks, how does Rabbi Eliezer know something as, one can say, as private, as, again, as the conception of Sarah, Rachel, Chana? So he learns it from what we call the law of transitive properties, or one of the extrapolatory methods of Chazal, the Yek Zera Shava, Atya Pekita Pekita, Atya Zechira Zechira. The first time that we actually find the terminology of Zechira is by Rachael Immenu, by Yizkor Elokim et Rachael. And this is a beautiful idea. Rachael is really the first one who's remembered. And then we find again by Chana, by Yizkareha Hashem. So Rabbi Elazar says, what would be the most auspicious time for Hashem remembering? Zechira, Zechira, when? Yom HaZikaron, Shabbaton Zechron Shua. That leaves Sarah out of the picture. Don't worry, by Sarah, by Hashem Pakadet Sarah, just like Chana, we find the terminology Ki Pakat Hashem et Chana. So Sarah was Nifkedet when Chana was Nifkedet, which is when Chana was Niskeret. And that's why we already saw in our previous Shurim how Chana was a central and is a central persona to Rosh Hashanah in particular. And now we're going to continue to see this as we continue with our sources, teaching us in the Masechet Megillah that Chazal chose the story of Chana as one of the important readings of Rosh Hashanah. But let's actually start with the machloket that we find in Masechet Megillah Daf Lamed Aleph, source number 3. Chazal debate, what should we be thinking? What should we be learning? What should we have a Yom Iyun on, basically, on Rosh Hashanah? So the Tanakama says, for Rosh Hashanah, we always read of the maftir, we read the korbanot of Musaf, because that's what's going to tell us what's unique about the day. And in fact, when I open up to the Karbanot in Bamidbar Parachavchet, I see that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are slightly different from the other Moadim, even though they all have some element of Simcha, even though they're all called Mikra Kodesh, even though they're all called a Shabbaton. By all the other holidays, we sacrifice 2 parim and 1 ayil. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have 1 par and 1 ayil, already telling us the day is a little different. But then the Tanakama adds, but we should also read from the Nevi'im, we should read Yirmiyahu Paraglam and Aleph, Haben Yakir Li Ephraim. This is going to be a central reading to Rosh Hashanah. The second opinion disagrees and says, no. Don't read Haben Yakir Li Ephraim, which talks about Zachoras Karenu Od, which actually mentions Rachael Immenu, Kobra Manishma, Nihi B'chi Tamrim, Rachael Mevakal Baneha. Rather, the stories of Sarah and the stories of Hannah are even more significant. That's what we should read. The Braita concludes, well, now by Idna Diika Treyome, now that we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, on the first day, we're going to read what sets the tone to Rosh Hashanah. We're going to read the stories of Sarah, which is why the Sarah story is so significant, and we're going to read the story of Hannah. Lemachar, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, that's the message that we're going to take with us from Rosh Hashanah and on. That's what we're going to continue with. Lemachar ve'elokim nisat Abraham. Take with you the story of Akizat Yitzchak, obviously the significance of the shofar, but at the same time, remembering how Hashem remembers and basically reminding Hashem, not only through the cries of the shofar, but through our own commitment of Yirat Elokim, reminding Hashem of Avram's commitment, and the famous midrash that tells us, yes, if you blow the shofar, Hashem will remember the zchut of Abraham and apply it to you as well. Ve'elokim nisat Abraham u'maftirin haben yakir li Ephraim. You're going to leave Rosh Hashanah. You're going to enter into the days of Aseret Yemei Teshuva, these days of Dirshu Hashem Hi Matzo. God is found. He's just waiting for us to seek Him out. Dirshu, and to literally request to seek out HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Fra'u Bioto Karov. How should we start seeking out God? Read this story. Read Haben Yakir Li Ephraim. And it's interesting that with regard to Rachael Immenu, we don't necessarily read from Breisha Paraglam, where the term of Vayiskor Elokim et Rachael appears, but rather we remember the perpetual tears and cries of Rachael Immenu, and we remember the end of the Haftorah. So let's take a look at what we do read, at what basically sets the tone for Aseret Yemei Teshuva, and then we're going to see how throughout these days, over and over again, we're reminded of Rachael Immenu. She really is the dmut, the persona that today in modern psychology, psychologists explain it's so important to have an image in your mind, some type of role model, or what's called in psychology an anchor, right? Someone who's going to always remind you of what you should be doing, of what the message is that you want to live your life as, really should direct you towards. So let's take a look at the cries of Rachael. Yirmiyahu Paraglam and Aleph begins with a beautiful nechama. This is somewhat ironic, considering that Yirmiyahu Hanavi has numerous nivuot of destruction, but this is one of the very, very few of consolation. Ko amar Hashem, matachim b'midbar, amstri decharev, haloch l'arvia Yisrael. I'm going to come at a time of exile and literally calm Am Yisrael down. Mirachok Hashem nirali v'avat olam ahavtich al kein meshachti chesed. Hashem says, even when I cast you away, I love you forever. Od evnech v'nevnech betulat Yisrael. I will build you and you will be rebuilt again. Oh, a young maiden of Yisrael. Od taditu payech. Please remember this terminology. One day, you're going to take your tambourines once more, bringing us back to the imagery of Yetziat Mitzrayim, V'yatzat b'mchol mesachakim. And particularly, the young maidens are going to go out and they're going to dance again. So let's remember that imagery as well. Otiti kramim b'hari Shomron, atunotim b'chilelu. You're going to once again plant vineyards in Shomron, telling us that He's not just consoling us for what we thought is the proper time period in the context of Yirmiyahu for 11 years before the Churban, when the aristocracy of Yehuda and Binyamin left the country, known as Galut Harashu Masker. But it seems that in this Nevuah, Yirmiyahu is alluding also to Galut Shomron, to what had happened nearly 130 years earlier during the time, as we know, of the last of the kings of Hoshea ben Elah, who was exiled together with the 10 tribes of the north, because he speaks about the return to the hills of the Shomron. Ki yesh yom kiru notzrim b'har Ephraim. He mentions Har Ephraim. Kumu v'na'alet Zion al Hashem Elokeinu. And even in Ephraim, the northern tribes, the descendants of Rachael, they're going to come back to Beit Hashem Elokeinu, referring to the Beit HaMikdash. Ki kama Hashem, ranu liyakub simcha v'tzahalu b'rosh goyim, hashmiu halalu v'imru, hosha Hashem et amcha et shevit Yisrael, hineni mevi otam me'eretz tzafon v'kibatztim miyarketei aretz, bam iveru piseach, harat v'yoledet yachtav. I'm going to bring them back from the northeastern lands. Apparently, most of the Parshanim explain he's referring to the return from Bavel, where they're going right now. Kahal gadol yashubu hina. B'vechi yabo b'tachnunim movlim olichem al nachalei mayim b'derech yashar lo yikashlu ba. And even though they're going in tears, they're going to return, and Hashem is going to literally help them return. Ki hayiti li Yisrael la'av Ephraim b'chorihu shemut v'Hashem goyim v'gizu b'yim v'merchak v'imru mizareh Yisrael yikaptenu. The same one who spread Am Yisrael out is going to gather us in, like a shepherd to his flock. Ki padash et Yaakov go'alo miyad chazak Immenu uva'u v'ranenu b'mrom tzion b'naru al tuv Hashem al dagan ve'al tivor shel yitzar ve'al b'nei tonu bakar v'aytan nafsham ki gan rabeh v'lo yosifu l'dava od. What beautiful words of comfort that we know are taken from this parak. I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to bless your land with all the natural resources. And this isn't just a physical blessing, but also an emotional blessing, says Hashem. I'm going to fill your very famished soul, and you will not experience anguish again. As tismach b'tula b'machol, again the imagery of girls are going to go out dancing. I'm going to make you happy once more. And the Kohanim will once again go back to the deshen, the ashes of the Mizbeach. And the question that we have is obviously why, out of all the different personae that Yirmiyahu could have chosen to depict as someone crying as we go into exile, why did he choose Rachael? Kol b'Rama nishma. And this in itself is going to raise questions. Is Rama a reference to where Rachael is, the area of Shmuel Hanavi's birth, Ava Ramatayim Tzofim, directly south of Beit El, or is Rama a description of her kol, machloket of the Parshanim? Is she screaming literally with a loud voice? Kol b'Rama nishma nehi b'chit hamrurim. And the pshat seems to be that she's crying bitter tears. Rachel mebakal baneha. She's crying for her children. Well, we just saw that Ephraim is the name that's given to Am Yisrael here. So she's crying for her children, literally Ephraim, the son of Yosef. But really, it's depicting all of Am Yisrael. And she refuses to be consoled because her children are no longer there. But Hashem answers Rachael, you may stop crying because there's a reward for your actions. Your children will return from the lands of the enemy. Not now, but in the future, there's hope. Your children will return to their country. And sure enough, the continuation, she will hear Ephraim mitnoded yisartani v'yivaser ke'ego lo lumad hashiveni va'ashuva ke'ata Hashem Elokai ke'acharei shubi nichanti v'acharei hibadi safati al yerach boshri v'gam nechlanti ki nasati charpat neurai haben yakir li Ephraim en yelet shashuim kimidei zabribo zachor eskerenu od. And this seems to be why we continue reading. It's not just a way of remembering Rachael Immenu for her children in every generation, but the actual terms of Zachor Eskerenu Od, on Yom HaZikaron, it's obvious. Hashem says, I'll keep remembering you on an annual basis. Don't worry. Al Kain Hamul Me Ailo. In the meantime, my intestines literally go out to you. I'm sick in the stomach over you, says Hashem. Rachem Rachamenu, no Hashem, not to worry, I will have mercy. And obviously, this is a beautiful, encouraging, not just consoling, but uplifting nevuah to read as we leave Rosh Hashanah, Yom Hamlachat HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and remember that despite our iniquities, Hashem says there's hope. There's hope, and specifically for remembrance, and particularly positive remembrance together with mercy. But what we're going to explore now is how this parak is not only revisiting one aspect of Rachael Immenu, but we're going to see Yirmiyahu is basically referring to other allusions of Rachael Immenu throughout Tanakh, particularly to what we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, the story of Hannah, and how Shmuel Hanavi already revisits Rachael throughout history. Shmuel Hanavi is going to set the tone. We don't really see so many allusions in general to the Avod, to the time period of the Avod in Sefer Yehoshua, by virtue of the fact that Yehoshua really wants to connect us to our most previous history, to the time period of Moshe Rabbeinu. So there are many, many allusions, comparisons with speeches of Yehoshua, miracles of Yehoshua, comparable to those that occurred during the time of Moshe. However, with regard to Sefer Shoftim, Shmuel, all of a sudden, Shmuel Hanavi brings us back to the time period of the Avot, basically telling us that there are many challenges that have started, as Chazal teach us as well, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that start really with the time period of the Avot. But interestingly, more than any other persona that is going to, one can even call we would say is in the background of Sefer Shoftim and Sefer Shmuel is none other than Rachael Immenu. Let's prove it and ask ourselves then, what is the point of this anchor? Why is it that Mama Rachael is the one that really is in our hearts and minds during these days? And we're going to prove it not only through the text itself, but prove it through really certain historical events that we find happen during this time as well. Beautiful. So Ephraim, beautiful. Ephraim is the beloved child, Haben Yakirli, the one that Yaakov Avinu, do you remember, put his right hand on, basically is going to turn to greatness. So on one hand, Ephraim represents the strength of Yosef, right? The Bechor of Yosef, even though he's really not. At the same time, Ephraim represents the survival of Am Yisrael in Galut, right? Like Mitzrayim, that Hashem, and that's why Yosef names him Ephraim. So Ephraim becomes the nickname of the beloved child. Isn't that interesting? The one who's born in Chutz La'aretz, but becomes the stronger one, is whose descendant brings us to Eretz Yisrael, namely Yehoshua ben Nun. So we all become known as Bnei Ephraim. In addition to the fact that Ephraim, when we first came to Eretz Yisrael, as we discussed in Yehoshua and Shoftim, Ephraim is the central region. So just like today, people may call him Merkaz Haaretz. I'm not sure why, Tel Aviv. It so is not the center of the land. The center of the land really was Ephraim, and they were the noble people, both in strength, and the Mishkan was there for 369 years. So that already created a certain, let's say, a nickname basically for Am Yisrael. So let's take a look at Sefer Shoftim.
One little point. I think also Yirmiyahu is pointing out to us, you still are one people.
Beautiful, right? Even though he's talking really to Yehuda, he's alluding to the fact Ephraim is still there and you're all going to come back as one. Beautiful, beautiful. Keep that idea in mind because we're going to develop it further. But let's go back to the end of Shoftim that Be'ezrat Hashem we're going to explore over the next few weeks after the Chagim, where we hear one of the most notorious stories, if you remember, of Pilegish Begiva, and what happens as a result of this terrible raping of the woman in Binyamin. So all the different tribes get together and they decide that they're going to wage war against the tribe of Binyamin. And what happens as a result? The tribe is almost entirely annihilated. Let's take a look at the aftermath of the story. Paraglam, the Ish Yisrael Nishma ben Mitzpah. They go to the area of Mitzpah, which is in northern Binyamin, and they say, you know what, for the very few people left over in Binyamin, we want them annihilated. We're not going to allow them to have children. We're not going to give our daughters to the people of Binyamin. They abused this woman. We don't want our daughters abused. And interesting that they come to the area of Beit El, even though where's the Mishkan during this time? It's in Shiloh, but they're going to this religious site of Beit El, where Yaakov was, where Rachael died. And they're going to cry there. And then they reflect and realize, oh my gosh, do you know what just happened? Why did Hashem let this happen? Hashem allowed for an entire tribe to almost be wiped out. Now, what's the irony? Excellent. Why are you blaming God? It's your responsibility. But they recognize, oh my gosh, we're in a terrible situation. We basically almost wiped out an entire tribe. Look at this terrible civil war, really internal genocide. This is horrific. And then the people realize, oh no, we feel so sorry for Binyamin. Ki asa Hashem peretz b'Yisrael. It's Hashem's fault. So they say, but now what are we going to do so that lo yimachei shevet Israel? We can't have this tribe wiped out, literally erased. They said, you know what? But we're so frum, and we made a promise that we're not going to give our daughters to the people of Binyamin. So you know what? We'll let the people of Binyamin go out and steal our daughters. What will they do? This is the first time that we find the girls in Tanakh going out to dance a field dance. This is before Shlomo HaMelech talks in Shir Hashirim about the Mecholah, also of the Ra'ayah, of the beloved. Here we see that what does it mean when girls dance the field dance? That was a way of rebuilding the people, because that became a custom of basically a great shidduch scene, right? Today we have single Shabbatonim. They used to have like singles dancing, not exactly, but again, basically we then know that these dances were particularly on Tu B'Av, the anniversary here of the great festival of Shiloh, and also on Yom HaKippurim, and something very beautiful here. So going back to Yirmiyahu Paraglam and Aleph, we see that Yirmiyahu, by saying you're going to be rebuilt again, don't worry, your cries are going to be transformed into the dances of the young maidens. What perhaps is he referring to? To not just the return of Am Yisrael, but the unity of Am Yisrael, as we're going to make sure that no tribe, particularly Binyamin, is wiped out ever again. So don't worry, Ephraim, Binyamin, notice that the focus is on Rachael Immenu's children. Don't worry, your children aren't going to be wiped out, right? They're going to be dancing again. The young maidens are going to dance. Binyamin is going to survive. Beautiful. But let's see how Shmuel continues the Rachael imagery in a Parak Aleph, which we just read last week on Rosh Hashanah. The story begins in Rachael Immenu territory. And what do you know? The story reminds us Elkanah has two wives. One has children, one is barren. What is this already reminding you of? Well, just in case you weren't sure, says Shmuel, take a look at Pasuk Hey, Ulachana yite mana chatapayim, ki et chana ahev, v'Hashem sagar rachma. There's only one other man of whom it says that he loves a woman, and what do you know? That woman was also barren. Who is that? Yaakov loving Rachael. He basically says, my parents, it's like Yaakov and Rachael all over again. So when you look at the background of the story, he says there's a lot of Yaakov and Rachael. Focus on the areas of Ephraim and Bethel. He's already getting us ready, but he's also getting us ready, as we know, for a lot of hope. But what happens with Yaakov and Rachael? All these dreams that unfortunately weren't fulfilled. We have a lot of crisis. We have a lot of tragedy. And it starts even with Chana and Rachael, Sagar Hashem Ba'ad Rachma. Now that already is also telling us there's hope, because just like we found this terminology in the Rachael story, what eventually happened? Vayiskar Elokim et Rachael, Vayiftach et Rachma. So eventually the same is going to happen for Chana. But take a look at Chana's response. What do you know? By the story of Rachael and Bereshit, we didn't hear this, but Chana does something that now we understand sets the tone for our future understanding of Rachael. It's almost as if Chana helps fix not just Yiftach and not just the parents of Shimshon. Who else does she fix? Rachael. She's the tikkun for Rachael. Vatitpalel al Hashem ubachot tivkeh. When's the next time that we're going to find tefillah with bechiyah? Take a guess. Rachel mevaka al baneha. And notice what she asked for. Hashem, please. Can you remember me? Almost as if, right? Like Rachael. And what does she do? And notice this. She davens v'kola lo yishamea. But her voice cannot be heard. And Chazal say, you know what? This should be the way that we daven every single day. But wait a second, we find the exact same words in what we just read later on in history by Yirmiyahu Paraglam and Aleph. Kol birama nishma nihi b'chi tamurim Rachael mevatal banaha. Rachel's cry is going to be what type of cry? Not a silent one, a very virama, a very, very loud one, as to tell us daven every day like Chana, but realize that every once in a while you're going to need the tefillah and the tears of Rachael. That the reaches a certain time in the year when you're supposed to read about Rachael, read about Hannah, and read about her tefillah, not even the initial tefillah, but the tefillah of Hodaya, where she looks at all of Am Yisrael. But really, what should you take with you? What should you be doing these 10 days? You should be crying. You should be screaming your tefillot. You should be staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning in Migdalot, right? Literally screaming out to Hashem. And what do you know? V'yizkarecha Hashem. And we also have a neder in the story. And we also have something else, which is very interesting. And namely, that Hannah insists that Shvi ad gamlechoto ach yakim Hashem et varo, vatashav haisha batenek et bena ad gamla oto. She doesn't want to let go of him so quickly. And reminiscent also of Yaakov, who doesn't want to let go of Binyamin, right? He's the youngest, he's the baby, Vanar Na'ar. Also, similar terminology from the Yosef story. So just in case we're not convinced, let's continue, and we're going to see how Rachael appears in the story again. So as she's in the background of all of Sefer Shmuel, now we continue Shmuel ala Perek Daled to the horrific destruction of Shiloh. And how does Shmuel Hanavi tell us about the destruction? We hear Vayinagef Yisrael, there's a terrible magifa, and the Aron Brit Hashem is taken. Basically, this is his way of saying that the Mikdash is destroyed. And not only the Mikdash destroyed, take a look at Pasuk Yud, Vayipom Yisrael Shloshim Elef Ragli, 30,000 infantry soldiers were taken. Later on, we hear even more people killed as well. Vayaretz Ish Binyamin Mehamaracha. And who's in the story? It's taking place in Har Ephraim, and we have a Benyamite in the story. And who's he going to bring into the story? Take a look. At the same time that Am Yisrael is going to experience its first Chorban Mikdash through the Mishkan and Shiloh, the first time that people have to run away from their houses. Basically, they're going to be exiled here in their own land by the Plishtim, who are going to overtake control of the country. And then we hear that Aron Brit Hashem was taken, but Shmuel Hanavi already gave us background to that. That's because they were like worshiping it, like Avodah Zarah. They thought that the power of God was actually contained in the Aron. And then how does the story end? When this Ish from Binyamin tells Eli that his sons were taken and we lost the war, and the Aron Hashem was taken, Eli falls backwards and dies. And then a story that we don't really need to hear, Shmuel Hanavi puts in, and you're going to appreciate exactly why. Pasuk Yutet, V'chalato eshet Pinchas hara lelet, v'tishmat hashmua el helekach Aron Elokim omet chamia v'isha. Both her father-in-law and her brother-in-law and her husband have died. And out of pain here, she went into labor, and she dies during labor. And all those standing around her say, don't worry, and she names him a very harsh name, Ikavod. The glory has been taken away. Ki gala kavod mi Yisrael. Ali lakach Aron Elokim. The glory of Hashem was taken away because the Aron was taken. But Omer gala kavod mi Yisrael. Ki nelkach Aron Elokim. And everyone understands that. What is Shmuel Hanavi revisiting in the story? Breshit Paraglam the death of Rachael, which, by the way, happened in exactly the same areas of Beit El Shiloh region, right? And in our minds, we're actually picturing, oh my, wow, it's the same road. The Beit El region where Rachael also goes into labor because they're on their path back. And same story, the Mi'aled tells her, don't worry, and she's the one who really sets the tone for naming a child. She names him Ben Oni, the son of my Tsar, the son of my Avelut. But actually, in Sefer Shmuel, On doesn't just mean Sa'ar, it means on utrafim. It's a type of avodah zarah. Basically, she's saying, ikavod, the mother, Eshet Pinchas, when she dies during childbirth, she's saying, I know why I'm dying. I know why we're suffering so much. And that's because al hilakach Aron Brit Elokim, because we didn't treat the Aron properly, because we worshipped it, because it was really avodah zarah to us. And this is Shmuel Hanavi's way of saying, part of the reason why Rachael dies, part of the reason why we're going to suffer Chorban is because of Avodah Zarah, is because of the own and Trafim. Rachael Immenu realizes, and I'm dying because I took the Trafim. I'm dying because I still believe that there was power to these Trafim, and I put them under my womb when I was menstruating, thinking that maybe they had some supernatural fertility powers. Now, just in case you're not convinced that Shmuel over and over is revisiting the Rachael stories, we see that when Malhot comes, and one of the advantages of Malhot, even though Shmuel initially is very reserved, he is going to be very excited about Shaul. Where is Malhot going to come from? Interestingly, not from Yehuda. Where does it come from? From Binyamin. So Shmuel from Har Ephraim, even though he's a Levi, Shmuel has this affinity towards whom? The descendants of Rachael. Shaul from Binyamin is going to come, and not only is he going to seek victory from the Plishtim, what is the whole point of the Melech? He's going to unify us. And therefore, I don't think that it's by chance that Shmuel says to Shaul, one of the signs that you are meant to be king is going to be that you're going to go past Kever Rachael. And that's where you're going to find two people by Kever Rachael, Bigvul Binyamin Bil Tzeltzach. And then you're going to go up and you're going to continue to Beitel. In other words, if you want to be the king, then you have to realize that you're also part of the genealogy of your matriarch, of Rachael Immenu. You're going to associate with Rachael, who knows how to fix, who recognizes Avodah Zarah. But what we're going to see as well, Rachael, who knows and is always viewed as the Akeret HaBayit. Rachael, who's going to have this power to unify. And therefore, the Tosefta explains, and this is a very long, and I won't necessarily elaborate on the entire debate then, that where is Kever Rachael? Because if Shaul is going from the area of Ramatayim Tzofim, right, basically near the areas of Beitel to Kever Rachael, he's obviously not going all the way down to Beit Lechem Yehuda. Not only that, it says that Kever Rachael is in Gvul Binyamin, so the Tosefta explains, yes, it's in Gvul Binyamin, but wait a second, Halo lo nikvara ela bebeit Lechem. I thought we go to Beit Lechem to daven there, which is in Yehuda's. Shenemar v'tamat Rachel v'tikaver b'derech Efrat, and Efrat is in Yehuda. Shenemar v'ata Beit Lechem Efrata. Ta'ir liot balfei Yehuda, ela amar lo achshav shani medaber imcha hinam al kfurat Rachel ata holech, ve'hin ba'in motzei otan b'gvul Binyamin b'tzoltach, meaning two people are coming, says the Tosefta, from Beit Lechem, and they're going to meet you in Tzoltach, which is in Binyamin, which means that this is a very interesting sign. You need people who were just by Kever Rachael and Yehuda to come to you, Shaul, and this is one of your signs. You're going to meet them here in Binyamin. In other words, you're going to revisit Rachael Immenu or the Yalkut Shimoni. Yeah, so this shows that to everyone see why it's confusing. In Sefer Bereshit, it says that where is Rachael? Where does she die? It says that they're leaving Beitel, but she dies B'derech Beit Lechem ki Efrata. So what do we always understand? She dies on the way to Beit Lechem, and he buries her Beit Lechem. When we think Beit Lechem, we're thinking Beit Lechem, Yehuda. Difficult though, because then I open up Shmuel, who's revisiting Kever Rachael, and he tells Shaul in Binyamin, he's going to go and he's going to meet two people by Kever Rachael in Binyamin. Make up your mind. Is Kever Rachael in Binyamin or is it in Yehuda? The Tosefta says it's in Yehuda. Two people from Beit Lechem, so picture Kever Rachael today. Two people from there are going to go up north and meet Shaul HaMelech in Binyamin. That's resolution number one. But again, why such a weird sign then? But clearly Shmuel believes that it's important to revisit Rachael Immenu at the time of the coronation of Shaul. Beautiful. The Yalkut Shimoni says, what does it mean that there are going to be two people by Kever Rachael and Gvul Binyamin? Where do we find that Rachael is in this place called Tzoltzach? I thought she is B'derech Efrat, he Beit Lechem. Amar lo, achshav shani imcha hima al kfurat Rachael. Ata holech v'him ba'im. Ata motzei otam b'gvul Binyamin b'tzoltach. So again, one possibility that the people are going to come, as we just said, quoting the Tosefta, from Beit Lechem Yehuda, and they'll meet him in Tzoltach. And Rav Yossi HaGalili says, it doesn't mean that Kever Rachael is in Tzoltach. Rather, Tzoltach isn't an actual area in Midrash. Rather, it's Tzach Tzel Shel Yom, they're going to meet you clearly, or it's Tzach Tzel Shel Zaken Malachim Michalatzacha Yitzeu, or it's really a bracha that's given to him. So the Ramban, interestingly, says, I want you to know, I always thought that Kever Rachael was really in Nachalat Binyamin. I always thought that it was in Binyamin because she dies by Beitel. And how do you understand that she's buried Derech Ephrata hi Beit Lechem? She's buried on the road to Beit Lechem, but not in Beit Lechem. Excellent. Kfishishim, right? As soon as you pass Somet Chizma, right? I pointed this out. Buses, again, as you're going up from Pisgat Ze'ev, before you hit Beit El, on the right-hand side of the road, there's an area called Kuraya Beta Yisrael, and there's a huge monument that many believe that this is, in fact, the Kever of Rachael. The Ramban says, I thought that Ramah referred to the place in Binyamin until I made Aliyah. And then I had the zchut, he says, to come to Eretz Yisrael, and I see it's Immenu sham. There's no kever there. It's all destroyed. Lo nemar b'katuv birama Rachael mevakal baneha. He said, then I reread the pasuk. It doesn't say birama Rachael mevakal baneha, but kol birama nishma. Her voice is in Ramah. In other words, nireh beinai ki kivra Yaakov baderech. He buried her on the road to Beit Lechem in Yehuda because he knew Yehuda. He knew that Malhot wasn't going to last in Binyamin. Where was it going to go to? Yehuda. And he wanted Rachael not with the temporary Malhot of her children in Binyamin. He wanted Rachael by the permanent Malhot of Bnei Leah in Yehuda. But don't worry, it's close to Binyamin. It is, right? Beit Lechem is the northern parts of Yehuda. So it's close to, it's literally hop, skip, and jump away from the Bacon Center, from Emek Rephaim. So let's take a look. The Sefer says as well, again, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Beit HaMikdash b'toch chalko shel Yehuda. And we know that Binyamin and Yehuda, they're meant to be seen as sharing a nachala. That's why Yerushalayim ir shechubra la yachdav, or the Gemara Masechet Zvachim teaches us as well that when it says Vayelech David u'Shmuel vayishvu b'nayot v'Ramah, that when David goes to run away from Shaul to Nayot, it says, wait a second, Nayot isn't near Ramah, rather Shayu Yoshvim b'Ramah voskin v'ru Moshe Lulam, that they went to Ramah in Har Ephraim to talk about Nayot, which means Navet, to talk about the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, all the Midrashim see Binyamin and Yehuda connected through the Beit HaMikdash, which means that Rachael, in these stories as well, connects Am Yisrael, connects Binyamin and Yehuda. And that's why Yaakov creates a matzeva there as a sign, literally, as Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, to remember. And he knew that in the future, everyone would need the Nechama of Rachael, because Rachel's the one who's going to bring Binyamin and Yehuda back together again. Beautiful. And we're all familiar with source number 17, the P'tzachta Te'echa, which tells us, and that's where I quickly went through the other Mekorot, the P'tzachta Te'echa that tells us that what does it mean that Yaakov saw that Rachael was going to bring Yehuda and Binyamin back together again. So the famous Midrash tells us that when Am Yisrael went into Galut, all the Avot and Immenu stood and cried to Hashem, and Hashem doesn't listen to them until Rachael comes and she cries and she says, Hashem, I don't understand. Who has greater rachamim? Do you remember I had mercy on my sister and I allowed her to come under the wedding canopy instead of me by divulging the secret signs that Yaakov and I created. So I understand that now Am Yisrael brought in your rival. They brought in Avodah Zarah. Can't you have some rachamim? And this is why, as Rashi explains, also on Paraglam and Yirmiyahu, that's what Yirmiyahu means. Rachael is crying, and Rachael is saying, Hashem, really, look, I'm the one who brought Leah in. I have this power of bringing all of Am Yisrael together. I brought in my rival. You're not going to have any rachamim? And the Malbim explains, that's why Hashem can answer her. And we're already going to see that those same words, Mini kolech mi bechi, she's crying just like Yaakov cried, the same exact words of Yaakov in source number 20. Do you remember? Yaakov also refuses to cry. When? At the time of Mechirat Yosef. Who ultimately sold Yosef to Mitzrayim? Yehuda. Yehuda sells Yosef. And Rachael gets up and cries and says, Yehuda's now leaving. Hashem, do you remember my cries? And do you remember Yaakov's cries? I'm not going to stop crying. Not just Yaakov wouldn't stop crying until Yosef was brought home. I'm not crying. I'm not going to stop crying until Yehuda's brought home. And Hashem says, Mini kolech mi bechi. She's crying for all of her children, just like Yosef. And what does that mean? She's crying for the terrible senat achim. Over and over again, that's exactly what we see. The Churban of Shiloh. And now Rachel's perpetual cries and a Pilegish Begiva, all during times of civil disunity. And we're going to continue to see this now in what we just commemorated the day after Rosh Hashanah. And I don't think that it's by chance that Chazal say, you know what, leave Rosh Hashanah. Don't read about Rachael on the first day. Read about Rachael on the second day. And this is how you're going to enter into Aseret Yemei Teshuva. And you're supposed to say, what was really the first day of Aseret Yemei Teshuva? Really, Tzom Gedalia. What happened on Tzom Gedalia? Zechariah even tells the people, the delegation from Bavel, who want to know in the 4th year of Daryavesh, when the Beis HaMikdash is about half built. They're like, can we finally stop fasting on Tisha B'Av? And Zechariah responds and he says, it's not about the fast. Did you learn the messages? And what are the messages he tells them? He says, firstly, you forgot about Tzom Gedalia. You forgot about Tzom HaShvi'i. Well, let's go back and remember, what is Tzom HaShvi'i? That the Rambam tells us as well, was just as bad as Tisha B'Av. Why? Chazal teach us. It must be that when a tzaddik is killed, just like the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. But look at source number 24. The Rambam and the Malbim both explain, no, because even after the Beis HaMikdash, there was still a vestige of Jewish settlement in Eretz Yisrael. But after the assassination of Gedaliah, the people were afraid of Babylonian retaliation and they went down to Mitzrayim. And that's where they were killed and annihilated. And that's why Zechariah is so upset about the delegation coming from Bavel, saying, okay, back in Bavel, in the Chutz La'aretz, do we still have to fast on Tisha B'Av? And Zechariah says, you really didn't get the message? And what are you doing there? Come, restore settlement in Eretz Yisrael. And let's take a look and see the story of Yirmiyahu Paraglam. We hear so many of the same ideas and the same geography even of the Rachael stories. It happens after the Churban. Yirmiyahu joins the people with the appointed governor, Gedaliah ben Achikam ben Shaphan, who's willing to surrender to the Babylonians and not necessarily have full autonomy in the country so that we can at least stay in the country. So he brings the other forces in, Yishmael ben Netanya, who's a nationalist, and Yochanan ben Kareach, who's pro-Egyptian. And he tells them, please, can we just have achdut? Can we just come together in Mitzvah? What do you know? That same place where Shmuel brought them together after the Churban of Shiloh, the same place where we saw and that they basically cry after Pilegish Begiva, the very same place. And what happens? People, in fact, start coming together. All those refugees who started crossing over the Jordan, they start returning under Gedaliah. They come to Mitzvah. But then what happens? Source number 27, Yirmiyahu Parak Mem Aleph. Vayhi b'chodesh hashvi'im, Yishmael ben Netanya ben Elishama mizera hamlucha, v'Rabei hamelech asara anashim ito, el Gedaliah ben Achikam hamitzvata, v'yachlu sham lechem yachta b'mitzvah, v'yakam Yishmael ben Netanya v'aseret hanashim asher hayu ito, v'yaku et Gedaliah ben Achikam et Shaphan b'chered v'yamatoto. And Chazal explained why did Yishmael kill? And why did he kill Gedaliah? Well, he was Mizera Hamlucha. He knew that had he been appointed, that would have helped restore Malhot Yehuda. He did this out of pride and out of jealousy. But wait a second, it's even more than that. He had different political views. He was the head of a very different political party than Gedaliah ben Achikam. And what does he do? Not only does he kill Gedaliah and the Jews that are there and the Babylonian officers that are there, then 80 people come from Shomron to celebrate Rosh Hashanah and the Beis HaMikdash, and they're crying because they know the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and Yishmael slaughters them as well. Take a look at Pasuk Vav Zion, sorry, and where does he put them? El toch habor hu v'anashim asher ito. He slaughters them and he puts them in a pit. And as soon as you hear of Yishmael and a pit and killing, come on, what story do you think of? I just helped you. Paraglam Zion. Gana the Yishmaelim who take Yosef out of the bor by Kachu by Yeshlucho Tohabora when his own brothers, we're talking about members of Shevet Yehuda here, they're killing each other off. This is Pilagish Begaba all over again. This is Chorban Shiloh all over again. It's Chorban Beis Hamikdash. And even we had, as the Rambam said, the last ember still burning. We could have still have had settlements in Eretz Yisrael. What happens? More civil war. And they throw him into the bor. Yirmiyahu says, it's Sinat Achim, it's Mechirat Yosef all over again. As a matter of fact, in Pasuk Tet, he makes it very clear. Actually, it was the same bor that Asa made with Basha, and 450 years ago. Again, back to source number 29 in Sefer Malachim. There was a civil war even 400 years earlier between the king of Yehuda and the king of the north, the king of Ephraim. And the people, in fact, are reliving the civil war. And Yishmael starts running away to Ammon, and Yochanan ben Kareah catches up with them and says, don't worry, I'm going to save you. We're going to go down to Mitzrayim. And they're on their way down to Mitzrayim as if, oh my, Mechirat Yosef all over again. And yet they stop off in Beit Lechem. And they ask Yirmiyahu to daven to his God. And Yirmiyahu says, I'll daven, but he's not just my God, he's your God. And you're going to listen to whatever it is that God says. And the question is, why did they stop in Beit Lechem? It's true, it's down south. But it seems that they're stopping off in Beit Lechem and asking Yirmiyahu to daven because what do they want him to say? They want him to cry to whom? To Rachael. And Yirmiyahu says, okay, I'll do this. Take a look at source number 30, Yirmiyahu, Perek Membet. Vayhi miketz aseret yamim. When do we all go to Kever Rachael? When do we cry in the schutz of Rachael to bring us back together again? When do we turn to Hashem and say, Acharei shuvi nichanti Hashem? We're crying to you, Zacharis Karenu Od, we're your children. Have rachamim on us, Hashem. Look, we can come together. We can do it. We can do it. These are the days, and you're never going to believe this. I am sure that Yochanan ben Kareach's followers were all expecting. What was Yirmiyahu going to say? Don't worry, you have to go down to Mitzrayim for a couple of years, and then one day Hashem is going to bring you back. You want to know what Yirmiyahu says? As the Rabbanit says, he comes to them on Yom Kippurim and he says, you're never going to believe it. There's such power to these days. You don't have to wait 52 years. You don't have to wait 70 years. He employs the same terminology from Yirmiyahu, Paraglam, and Aleph. Take a look at the exact same words. Right now, Hashem has rachamim on you. That there's power to Rachael Immenu, specifically during these days. Chazal say, please take Rachael Immenu from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur with you. Take Rachael Immenu on Tzom Gedalia with you. Take Rachael Immenu today and on Erev Yom HaKippurim. Take her with you. And this time, kol b'ramah nishma. This time, cry those tears and daven b'ramah. Cry out with your loud voices. And make sure that what are you crying for? You're crying for Teshuva, Dvarim, Paraglam. These are the words of the tefillah and the cries of Rachael. B'shatat Hashem Elokecha b'shamata b'kolo. Im yani zachad miktzei hashamayim misham yikhabetcha Hashem Elokecha. B'shav Hashem Elokecha tshuvutcha v'richamecha. The exact same words. And therefore, the Rambam tells us, do you want to know what are the days that you should really be performing vidui? He says, yes, again, certainly Aser Yemei Teshuva, Darchei HaTeshuva, but every Tanit we have this opportunity, and the first one that he mentions is Shlishi B'Tishrei. This is a day. Really, these days are days that are meant for Teshuva. And the Maharal says, so what's this koach of Rachael? What is it that Rachael has? That Yirmiyahu revisits Rachael and Shmuel Hanavi revisits Rachael. Because Rachael explains the Maharal beautifully, both in Gur Aryeh, Anna, the Parsha, but also in his Sefer Netzach Yisrael. With regard to the eternity of Am Yisrael, he says, Rachael has this koach hamikabetz v'hama'achet et Yisrael b'galut shelahem. Rachael, the Akeret Habayit, knows how to bring all the children together. We revisit Rachael every time we want to bring Yehuda and Binyamin back together. When we want to fix the problem of Mechirat Yosef, when we remember Rachael dying too early. And I don't know, is she in Beit Lechem Yehuda or is she in Beit Lechem Binyamin? It doesn't make a difference. We actually go to the one in Beit Lechem Yehuda because we show that she, the mother of Binyamin, is also the mother of Yehuda. She brings us all together, the Akeret HaBayit. And you can't then not think of the next allusion, which is what we're going to conclude with right now, the allusion to not just Yaakov and Rachael, but Rabbi Akiva, the same words, the same letters, Rabbi Akiva and Rachael Immenu, or Rachael Ishto Shel Rabbi Akiva, which we also revisit on Yom HaKippurim, or Zaru Al Tzadik L'Israeli Simcha. This is Rabbi Akiva, who was killed on Yom HaKippurim. This is Rabbi Akiva, whose last words were Shema Yisrael. This is Rabbi Akiva, who has very, very similar life to Elkanah and Hannah and Yaakov and Rachael. He was the shepherd. He loved Rachael. Rachael also, and basically gives up on a marriage with Rabbi Akiva by sending him off to the Beit Midrash for 24 years. And Rabbi Akiva comes back and gives her the Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, like a matzeva in Beit El, very similar idea. And what do you know? Just like the father-in-law cast him out, Kalba Savua cast out Rabbi Akiva and Rachael from his house, and then again came and source number 39 in Masechet Ketuvot and asked for Mechila. And then they made peace at the end. So too Lavan and Yaakov, right? And on your own, you're going to think of all these allusions. But what is the power of Rabbi Akiva and Rachael? The same power of Rachael Immenu, that power of Achdut. Rabbi Akiva is Mr. Echad. He's Mr. One. He says, take a lulav echad, etrog echad, hadas echad, arava echad. He's Mr. Achdut. Not only that, we find that when his Rabbi Eliezer, who he himself had to put in Chirem when he's dying, right? The students come and they sit 4 amot away because he's in Chirem. And Rabbi Eliezer says, why haven't you come to me beforehand? And they said, well, and we're coming now. Lo haya lanu pnai. We couldn't beforehand. And then he says to them, Tameani im yamutu mitatatman. I hate to tell you this, my students, but you're going to all die a terrible death. And Rabbi Akiva says, how about me? And he says, Rabbi Akiva, his primary Talmud, is going to die the most gruesome of deaths, which we know from Masechet Brachot Daf Samach. We're on the last page now. Why Rabbi Eliezer told him this? Oh, why was he in Chirem? Because of the story of Tanuro Shalachnai, a whole separate shiur, that basically he wasn't willing to accept the opinions of, basically the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua, who had decided what the status of Tumah and Tahara. But what's the irony? Here he's in Chirem and he's dying, and they're all coming to him to ask him about what's Tameh, what's Tahor. And then he turns and he says, you're all going to die, Rabbi Akiva the worst. And then he says, and Rabbi Akiva was the only one who asked me to teach him, right? Basically the power of a Kabbalistic Echad. I'm not going to get into this now, but only Rabbi Akiva asked me to teach him Masa Merkava, to teach me what's called also the world of Nitiyot and Kishuin. Amarti davar echad nitkabsu kulam lamakom echad. Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva this power of Echad, this power of Achdut. So now we understand that particularly on Yom HaKippurim, we still take with us the echoes of the cries of Rachael from Rosh Hashanah. We take with us the cries of Achdut. We take with us the cries really of Rabbi Akiva, where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, that's why we're going to read Asara Haruge Malhot. Eila Eskara, we're going to read this on Yom HaKippurim to remember Mechirato Shel Yosef. And you're going to remember Rabbi Liptak Shir on why we offer a chatas every holiday, and especially on Yom HaKippurim, to remember Mechirat Yosef, to remember that civil war, to remember Sinat Achim, to remember the cries of Rachael, and to remember what we're fixing. And ultimately, why 10 tzaddikim were killed. The Otzar Midrashim explains that that's exactly the background. The emperor asked, wait a second, you were never killed for Mechirat Yosef. You should really be killed. And sure enough, we're told that Rabbi Shmuel, isn't that interesting? The Kohen Gadol goes up and he hears that, yes, it's time for you, lekabel et hadin. It's time for you to realize that that's the punishment for Sinat Achim. And now these 10 tzaddikim, like the 10 brothers of Yosef, are going to be killed. But we take with us the cries of Rachael and the cries of Yaakov. The Gemara Masechet Pesachim tells us that Yaakov Avinu, and wasn't really sure, right, whether or not all his sons are going to walk in his path, and they all come and they tell him, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and he answers, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Ba'ed. The Gemara on Brachot tells us that when Rabbi Akiva was dying, his last words are the same. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He brings the Achdut of Am Yisrael together again. And the Ramban explains sometimes this means, and davening and crying, and sometimes, like Yosef, it means being quiet, not divulging to Yaakov. Oh, by the way, you know what the brothers did to me? They sold me down to Mitzrayim. Rachael, who knows when to be quiet? And Esther Hamalka, who knows when to be quiet? But the same ones who know when to cry, when to scream and cry out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And basically, it's a cry, really, for all of Am Yisrael to come together. On Yom HaKippurim, we scream out together, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. We fix the problems of Sinat Achim. We show that in this time of pre-elections, we can really get together again. We cannot sometimes be silent and hold our tongues like Yosef, and we also know when to cry. And Yom Kippur is that day for those cryings, for taking still the tefillot of Rachael Immenu, to revisit them, to scream out loud, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and just like Yaakov Avinu, to answer properly, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Ba'ed. Kamar Chatima.
Stop for a second. Okay. Hold on. Okay, I would like to